Hello, amazing people. It is time for another hot lap. Get your helmet and let's go for a ride. Firstly, I would like to address the elephant in the room. Yes, it has been almost a month since I uploaded the last episode of the Hotlap Podcast. To be honest, I didn't even get busy or anything. I just kind of put this on the back burner. I had some other things going on. I didn't get around to recording the episodes each week. In turn, it's gonna bite me in the ass. We have 9 races to cover. We have the Monaco Grand Prix, the Canadian Grand Prix, and the Spanish Grand Prix, as well as the 24 hours of Le Mans and NASCAR races in Charlotte, Gateway, Sonoma, Iowa, and New Hampshire to go over. We have a ton of racing to catch up on, and some major shifts within the driver market and the championships, each respectively, of course, to go over. Let's hop straight into the action with some Formula 1. Alright, Formula 1. Red Bull were struggling to get back into their groove, and this is in no way assisted or improved upon by the performance given to us in Monaco. Max Verstappen and his counterpart Sergio Perez were both lackadaisical when it came to running the streets of Monaco. All weekend, Red Bull struggled for pace, though it is usually a characteristic through FP1 and FP2. We usually see some pace come out of the RBs as we move into the latter sessions and into qualifying, and of course, always in the race. This, however, was not the case in Monaco. The drivers where the recently upgraded McLaren and Ferraris came out to show their dominance, with the 4 drivers for the respective teams filling out the front of the grid places. Charles Leclerc, the home Monagesque, looking to break the curse of Monaco at his home Grand Prix that had plagued him for his entire career and had ended up on pole position once again. Charles had faced much trouble from not being able to start the race due to damages, a poor strategy that led to a DNF. Leclerc has been through the ringer on the streets that he grew up on. Charles was clenching a win, and this would bring him to the end of a long, dark, and tormented saga for the Monagesque Ferrari driver. As he stared down Sandoval from the start line, he was alongside Oscar Piastri, with Carlos Sainz, his teammate, directly behind him, and Lando Norris across diagonally from him. The grid back from that was George Russell, then world champion Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton followed him, 7-time world champion, as we know. Behind him was the kamikaze himself, Yuki Tsunoda, followed by Alex Albon, and Pierre Gasly rounded out the top 10. On lap 1 of the race, as the lights went out, all the drivers got away fairly clean through Sandoval, but on the long uphill, twisty climb, there was trouble between the Haas cars and Sergio Perez back in 18th to 20th. As the cars collided after going 3 wide up the narrow Monaco streets, the Haas car of Kevin Magnussen was pinched by Perez with no room left to move into. The front of his car made contact with the rear right of Sergio Perez's car, sending him into the barrier and then up into the air. Perez's car shot back across the track and picked up Nico Hülkenberg, that eventually brought out the red flag and sent all 3 drivers to the showers early. This red flag allowed other drivers to change their tires, which in turn led to a very, very boring rest of the Monaco Grand Prix, where strategy was taken out the window, and on track, the overtaking was already so difficult. The rest of the race, as was predictable, was very uneventful for everyone except Charles Leclerc fans. And who's not at least a bit of a Charles fan, especially with the addition of Leo Leclerc, his dog, into the family. Anyways, the other event that had happened during the race was between Alpine teammates Ocon and Gasly. As is tradition, almost every weekend they have a little bout. They came together in an incident of hard racing and high tensions at the start of the race. Ocon took the blame for the incident and faced much backlash and hatred online. Ocon later released a statement via Instagram showing his disappointment to the fans' reactions. The incident was the latest of a string of collisions Ocon had with his teammates, but in a lengthy statement, Ocon said the narrative that has formed around the string has been fueled by misinformed statements and gross distortions. He added that and suggested that it's not a team player. He added that the suggestion he is not a team player has been inaccurate, hurtful, and damaging. You have to feel at least a little bit for Ocon. He is yet to sign a contract beyond 2024 and is looking increasingly unlikely he will stay with Alpine. On lap 78 of the Monaco Grand Prix, Charles Leclerc fulfilled his childhood dream. He took his home Grand Prix, and we were given a piece of commentary history as he took his final lap.
Stop it.
The top 10 for the Monaco Grand Prix are as follows: Leclerc, Piastri, Sainz, Norris, Verstappen. Leclerc, Piastri, Sainz, Norris, Russell, Verstappen, Hamilton, Tsunoda, Albon, and Gasly. Maybe there's something that you notice about that top 10 compared to the order that the drivers start in that I went over earlier. We are now going to push ourselves through to the Canadian Grand Prix. Alright, starting off in qualifying for the Canadian Grand Prix. Q1 saw a lot of questions regarding grip on track, as it had seemed very damp and it wasn't quite dry tire running, but it wasn't quite wet tire running at this point in the race, at the very start of Q1. And even if we were to see drivers go out on softs after practicing in the wet, it would be for the very first time. The track had not rubbered in yet, and it was more, in fact, washed off by the presence of rain the rest of the week in Montreal. Q1 brought both state cars, Hülkenberg, Ocon, and crucially for the second race in a row, Sergio Perez, out of the qualifying session early. Q2 brought out Gasly, Magnussen, Sargent, and both Ferraris for the qualifying session to end before the top 10 shootout, making this race tough on the Maranello-based team to try and fight their way through the field on Sunday's race. Q3, we saw something that is very, very uncommon. Our top 10 starting order is George Russell in P1 after having the exact same time as world champion Max Verstappen, who would start from P2. The only reason that Max started behind George was because he set the time second. Behind those two was Lando Norris, followed by Piastri, Daniel Ricciardo, who himself had a very good qualifying session, Fernando Alonso, again, a very impressive qualifying session. But following them was seven-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. We have Yuki Tsunoda behind him, a top 10 fanatic at this point in the season. Tsunoda is just always right there from P7 to P10. He's always somewhere in there. Alonso's teammate Lance Stroll followed him up, and Albon wrapped up the top 10. We're going to get into the race right now. The race started before the race had even started. The Haas team took a gamble off the start with the wet race around the Montreal circuit, starting on extreme wets compared to the rest of the field, who started on intermediate tires. This allowed them to have extra grip, and in an interview with Kevin Magnussen after the race, he exclaimed how there was about 4 seconds per lap that they were faster on the full wets, but the gamble was lost during the pit stop. During the starting phase and the first stint of the race, the Haas cars shot forward. Kevin Magnussen described it as feeling like he was driving a Red Bull for a little bit. However, a silly pit stop mistake that cost about 8 seconds saw the Haas cars tumble back down the order and out of the points. Kevin Magnussen's engineer later told him that using simulation data, if that pit stop would have gone smoothly, they would have finished about P8 in the points. Going back to the start of the race, George Russell had to aggressively defend his spot from Max Verstappen as the lights go out, and defending his spot he absolutely does. George got his elbows out, and the top 4 hold their positions for a little bit. Magnussen and Hulkenberg gained 7 and 5 positions respectively after the first lap only. Lap 20 sees Lando Norris pass Max Verstappen for P2, and on lap 21, a charging Lando Norris moves past George Russell to take the lead of the Canadian Grand Prix. This same movement allowed Max Verstappen into P2, seeing George back to P3 in a sequence of 2 corners. A lot of pace shown here from the Papaya McLaren, and a lot of good racecraft shown early on from the likes of George Russell and, of course, Max Verstappen. Lap 25 brought out a yellow flag for the Williams of Logan Sargent. That was upgraded to a safety car after the car lost grip and slid out of a corner and into the wall on the still wet grass of the circuit. This triggered pit stops from Max Verstappen, George Russell, and Oscar Piastri from 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Lando Norris decides to stay out and box the following lap after losing a lot of time behind the safety car. He ends up coming out behind Verstappen and George Russell. On lap 30, Alex Albon gets overtake of the season, fighting his way past a racing bull and threading the needle between that racing bull that he just passed and the Alpine in front of him for a double overtake down the back straight into the final chicane before the Wall of Heroes. The last 3 on intermediate tire still by lap 45 are the top 3 in the race. Max Verstappen and George Russell box from 1st and 2nd, while Lando Norris stays out another lap to try and make the overcut work. Verstappen retakes 1st place, but Norris comes out in front of Russell the following lap. On lap 49, Lando Norris locks up into the final hairpin that allows George Russell to re-inherit his place in P2, only for George to go deep a corner later that let Lando get alongside him. They go side by side for an entire lap with some fantastic racing from the both of them. Lando Norris has another shot at P2, which he does inherit back from George. On lap 53, Carlos Sainz goes off the road to draw out a temporary yellow flag that quickly turns into a safety car as Alex Albon and Perez both spin out. Kind of in the same corner sequence, taking evasive action, they both spun out after Carlos Sainz. Russell and Hamilton box on lap 55 under the safety car. Russell and Piastri come together for 3rd after the restart that pushes Russell off the track. He stays behind Piastri for now. This bump of Russell off the road also allows his teammate behind to take Russell into 4th. Hamilton then overtakes Piastri for 3rd place, and on lap 66, George Russell gets past Piastri for 4th place. Yuki Tsunoda spins the car shortly thereafter and almost gets T-boned by the cars behind in a somewhat dangerous incident. I think there was just a little caution for the sector for that. I think Yuki Tsunoda quickly pointed his car in the right direction and the race continued. Russell versus Hamilton happens on lap 68, where George Russell takes P3 off of the 7-time world champion. Max Verstappen wins from Lando Norris, and George Russell gets that last spot on the podium. Finally, we are going to be jumping into this last Sunday's race of the Spanish Grand Prix, an exciting race that had a lot of potential to be amazing in 2024. Starting off with Spanish Grand Prix qualifying. At the end of Q1, both Williams and Racing Bulls, as well as Nico Hulkenberg, see an end of their qualifying session as Stroll barely escapes elimination. Q2 sees the exit of Stake, Aston Martin, and the other Haas of Nico Hulkenberg, and the other Haas of Kevin Magnussen as we go into the top 10 shootout. The end of Q3 sees the starting grid as follows. Lando Norris ends up taking pole position, followed by 3-time world champion Max Verstappen, 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's teammate George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, the 2 Ferraris paired up. We have Gasly behind them. Then Sergio Perez, who qualified P9, at least making it to the top 10 shootout. And Ocon and Piastri round out the top 10. Sergio Perez qualified P8. However, some grid penalties sees Alex Albon start from the pit lane, and Perez and Logan Sargent both get 3-place grid penalties. Moving into the race now. A lot of anticipation built from the start of the race here in Barcelona on Sunday. With Lando Norris starting on pole position, potential was building for a stunning race. Would Max Verstappen be able to pass Lando early? How would the Mercedes fare up front? Would this be a 2-stop or a 3-stop with the degradation of the tires? These were all questions on our mind. Let's talk about what the teams ended up doing. Norris tries to cover off Verstappen down the inside on the long run into turn 1. This allows George Russell to perform an absolute missile overtake around the outside into turn 1 as Max and Lando both take the inside line. Verstappen does get around Lando and takes P2 off of him as Lando Norris goes back to 3rd place. Max takes the lead off of George Russell on lap 3 into turn 1 in a similar fashion of how George gained his lead. Pierre Gasly has a long pit stop as there is a sticky right rear tire on his car. Kevin Magnussen then picks up a 5-second penalty for jumping the start, but it was a very, very marginal jump and very unfortunate for Kevin Magnussen. Picking up yet another penalty this season, we will likely see him missing a race. Russell too has a long pit stop, and this almost allows Carlos Sainz to jump him in the pit lane, but he came out right in front of it. Hamilton applies pressure to Sainz shortly after, allowing George to build a little bit of a gap. Eventually, Lewis overtakes Carlos, and it's a Mercedes 2-3 with Verstappen a comfortable distance at this point down the road in 1st place. On lap 35, George and Lando battle for the last podium position after Lando had moved by his teammate Lewis Hamilton. Lando, attacking George for P2, gets past, but George is able to respond, to which Lando gets back around him to keep P2. George is punished back by his teammate in P4, Lewis Hamilton, who does get around him during this bout. Tire degradation appears to allow the drivers to complete a comfortable 2-stop race, allowing for a soft, medium, soft strategy. I believe that Mercedes put Russell on a soft, medium, hard strategy for some reason. Not exactly sure why that's happened. Maybe it was a used set of mediums that he couldn't be out on for very long. The tire degradation is around 1/10 of a second per lap and gets worse as the tires age. George Russell was complaining about his fresh hard tires on lap 42. He could not fire them up the way that he expected to have grip and the way that he needed to have grip. By this point, Verstappen is 5 seconds ahead of P2, who would be Lando Norris, who himself had built a 6-second gap back from 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton. George Russell boxed for hards, and his teammate Hamilton boxes for softs a couple of laps later to go to the end of the race. Verstappen boxes, and Lando Norris's engineer tells him it's time to kill the tires and make up some time. Now on lap 45 of 66 is his chance to take the lead back, as Verstappen has to complete a warm-up lap to fire up his new tires. Verstappen wins the Grand Prix, followed by Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton, who steps onto the podium for the first time this year. Your top 10 from Barcelona are Verstappen, Norris, Hamilton, Russell, Leclerc, Sainz, Piastri, Perez, Gasly, and Ocon. That is all I have for Formula 1. It only took us about 20 minutes, which is our normal episode length, to get through our 3 Formula 1 races. Next, we're going to be diving into the World of WEC, the World Endurance Championship, the 24 hours of Le Mans. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let me pull up my script here because it is time to talk about the World Endurance Championship. There we are. The 24 Hours of Le Mans is a racing spectacle that draws in thousands of people every year to travel to the circuit in France to watch the race, and millions of viewers around the world to tune in and watch from home. Unfortunately, if you are a law-abiding citizen in the United States of America, you are unable to watch Le Mans. We do not have streaming rights to it. I think it is super, super dumb. Next year, I am going to try to get some sort of way to stream it on Twitch, some sort of permission from the World Endurance Championship, from the FIA, something like that, in order to have a little watch party for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But we will see if that comes to fruition. Like I said, for the US viewers who don't want to use a VPN to change their location virtually, we cannot watch it. I am going to try and keep this segment as concise as possible and cover only the main bits and pieces from the wonderful event. We will most likely be talking about the hypercar group, specifically with mention of others if important to the overall running of the race. Penske, Porsche, and Cadillac get the race underway, making it an all-American constructors front row. Penske takes an early lead of the race with their rocket ship of a Porsche. The two Ferraris behind make themselves known very quickly as one overtakes for the lead and the second quickly jumps into third place. Then the 51 would overtake to make it a Ferrari 1-2. The beautiful BMW ART car went off into the gravel at the last chicane of the lap. Going back to the garage, it would eventually be retired from the race. Lamborghini, a new team this year to WEC, did not go without its troubles. Former Formula One driver Daniel Kvyat spun his Lamborghini, leaving the pits for his first stint. That seemed to cause a chain reaction to the other Lamborghini that spun just moments later on a different part of the track. The Cadillac decided to become a lawnmower for a minute later on in the race as it slid across a barrier, but no major damage was conceived and it continued as normal. The Alpine cars did not get the memo that this was an endurance race. Both Alpine cars retired early on in its race, one on the opposite side of the Le Mans circuit with an engine failure, and the sister car had the engine blow up and was able to limp back to the pits, seeing Alpine out of Le Mans as a constructor itself. The GT3 Iron Dames car, of course exclusively driven by women, spun after contact from the Porsche hypercar, which would later serve a penalty. The Iron Dames were in poor shape after this, but able to continue the race. Another BMW hypercar was later seen crumbled on the front end after smashing into the barrier after contact from the 83 Ferrari. This brought out the safety car and an hour-long delay as the barrier was repaired down the tremendously long straight at Le Mans, only broken up by two chicanes. Rain joined the race, as did the safety car, for a lot of the driver's visibility became a major issue. This rain would keep the safety car out for 4 hours during the night, having the cars trundling around the course ready to get racing again. When we finally did get racing again, the Cadillac hypercar from Wayland smashed into the barrier shortly after a bad accident in GT3 that saw a car flying backwards into a barrier, then rolling over. Both the driver of the Cadillac and the driver of the GT3 vehicle were okay. The 83 Ferrari was unable to finish the race as it caught fire in the pits during a pit stop after a full electronic blackout. This saw the car exit early after leading many hours of this Le Mans race. Once again, the rain came late into the race and teams were forced to box to get off slick tires for the remainder of the race. This rain did not bring out the safety car for the race. They just had to box for more intense and extreme wet weather tires. After 22 of the 24 hours of Le Mans, there were still 9 cars at the top of the grid that were all contenders for winning in this race. In the end, though, Ferrari came out to be victors for the second year in a row at Le Mans, winning the 100th anniversary last year and the 101st anniversary this year. Of course, the Ferrari car that won is the number 50. Le Mans as a whole was a very, very, very exciting race. I absolutely recommend you watch. Probably not all at once because it is a 24-hour race, but it is a fantastic one. Definitely sit down, watch little chunks, little hours at a time. Eventually you will get through it, and it will absolutely be worth it. That's all I got for WEC. Like I said, I wanted to keep it concise. I wanted to keep it nice and short. I wanted to get you excited, wanted to get you into WEC. Go watch it yourself. It is absolutely worth it. If you are in America, you are able to watch the race replay. We just did not have access to it live. Let's get into NASCAR. We have 5 races to cover. Basically, what's going to happen here is I'm going to tell you the top 10 from each race, maybe a couple points from the first couple of races, and then we will talk about how the championship has shifted based off of these races. All right, first up in NASCAR, we have Charlotte. William Byron got the jump off of the late restart in Stage 1, claiming his first stage win of the season. Bell won Stage 2. We see Kyle Larson arriving at Charlotte to get into his car late in the race. The reserve driver was forced to stay out due to this current strategy. With 151 laps to go, there was a lightning delay on the race, which would allow Larson to get back into his car. However, the race was canceled at this point, and Larson never got to do any on-track running. Bell inherit the race due to unsafe weather conditions. Your Charlotte top 10 are Bell, Keselowski, Byron, Reddick, Hamlin, Gibbs, Elliott, Chastain, Bowman, and Berry. Moving into Gateway, we see Bell carrying his momentum all the way to the end and winning Stage 1 in Gateway. Stage 2 was a side-by-side with Larson and Busch, who came into Kyle Busch, sending them both around. Bell and Elliott take the restart with 21 to go in Stage 2. Can't exactly remember who crossed that line first. However, at the end of Stage 3, the final stage of this race in Gateway, Blaney ran out of fuel, and Cindric takes the win. Your Gateway top 10 were Cindric, Hamlin, Keselowski, Reddick, Logano, Dillon, Bell, Hocevar, Haley, and Larson. Sonoma was much the same. Some eventful actions took place. In the end, your top 10 were Larson, McDowell, Buescher, Elliott, Chastain, Allmendinger, Blaney, Reddick, Bell, and Gilliland. Iowa and New Hampshire were also two very similar races. Our main guys did perform. However, Bell did not do quite as well in Iowa as he did in New Hampshire. Your Iowa top 10 were Blaney, Byron, Elliott, Bell in 4th, Stenhouse Jr. in 5th, Logano, Berry, Bowman, Suarez, and Keselowski round out the top 10. In New Hampshire, Bell took the victory, followed by Briscoe, Berry, Larson, Buescher, Reddick, Stenhouse Jr., Nemechek, Truex, and Chastain in 10th. In NASCAR, as far as the point system goes, your top 10 for drivers so far this season are Kyle Larson in first with 618 points, Chase Elliott with 611 points right on his tail, followed by Denny Hamlin, Truex Jr., Reddick, Bell, Byron. Bell jumping up quite a bit with his major point scores in the last 5 races that we just talked about. Byron follows him, followed by Blaney, Chastain, and Brad Keselowski sneaks his way into the top 10 with 503 points. Your constructor order, as far as this NASCAR season goes so far, is Toyota with 727 points, Chevrolet right on their tail with 716 points, and Ford a little lackluster behind with 688 points. Ladies and gentlemen, it feels so good to finally put out another podcast episode for you all. Do not forget to leave a like, subscribe. Feel free to follow me on my socials linked down below. While you are down below, give me a comment of some tech talk ideas that you want to see so I can get some more exciting segments out for you. Come back next week. We will be back next week as we go over race results and key moments in the motorsports world. Until next time, don't forget to brake late and accelerate early. We'll catch you then.